Welcome to Heaven's Edge. Platform of nutrient exchange is appropriate for your life form.
An ale, I guess?
Sympathizing ale?
Alright, thanks. Let's try it. It's actually pretty good.
Attention Spacers, welcome back to another thrilling episode of Adventures in the Void. We are a sci-fi tabletop role-playing game discussion transmission. I am Jake.
And I'm Ross.
Join us as we trade tales and celebrate the beauty and wonder of the cosmos.
Hello, welcome to the Adventures in the Void Spacecast. My name's Ross McClure. Here at the Spacecast, we talk about independent science fiction tabletop role-playing games. I'm joined again by my friend, Jake.
You're right. I shouldn't have eaten the peaches. They were not peaches, and I have had the stomachache for 3 cycles now. So
I got the impression they weren't peaches when I saw it moving across the table.
yeah, but man, they were so good. But now I just can't even look at them anymore.
Yeah, who knew when we came out here that we would have to have all these complex negotiations with food as well. But
Yeah, and I just wish our ship preview was a bit bigger than it is. I think we could upgrade or do some type of trade-in.
we don't have the money.
That's true.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, let's just all right. Let's just imagine. Let's imagine we did have the money, Jake. If we had the money, like, what kind of ships? First of all, let's just start with like broad categories. Like, what are the broad categories of starship? Like, what are the kinds?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have your rust bucket, which is basically what we got now, right? You got
Yes.
it's falling apart at the seams. Thrusters work most of the time, but not all the time. Engines work most of the time, not all the time. Life support's usually functional, though, so that's good. And then you get the step up from there, what I would consider the, you got your Cadillac of starships, where you get that nice solo rider, the small little ship where you got you got a cockpit and not much else to go, but it's quick. You get that kind of ship. What else is there? There's the freighter, the big one.
They've got the rust bucket. We're gonna come back to these. And then what was the second one you said?
Well, you got the cockpit with nothing else. You got an engine and a seat.
Cockpit with engine and seat.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't say that's a subset of the first category?
Oh no, because rust bucket's barely that.
Right.
The rust bucket's like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? And then you gotta step up from that. You got an engine that takes you places.
All right.
Step up from that. You got some room to carry stuff with you, right? So you got maybe a freighter or a light cruiser. And then you step up from that, you get some guns, so you can actually protect yourself and the stuff you're carrying. Step up from that, well then, now we're getting into one of the ship part of the crew, right? The ship becomes a character at that point. It could even be, it can tie in the whole story together, right? Everything happens around the ship, and the ship has just as much say as otherwise. And then you get a step up from that. Now, why even leave the ship? Everything that matters can happen on the ship,
Okay. So here are the categories. Rust bucket, cockpit with an engine and a seat. Or room for stuff, carry stuff with guns, an actual person or friend, and then an entire setting. So let's start at the top here. Rust buckets. Like, what are some examples of rust buckets?
We got that one gambler and the hairy guy.
Oh yeah, we can't
They have a
actually.
ship that
We
works
might not
sometimes.
actually be able to say what they are. I forgot about that. Oh well.
I think we can always allude to it. And people know what we're talking about.
Yeah, that gambler
then
with
you got-
the. Okay, that was.
Yeah,
that
the
was
hairy
not
guy.
a good
Yeah.
Example.
Yeah, that was.
Sounded
I
like
think we
a
understand what you
seal
mean.
dying or something. Oh.
It's not far off from the real thing, though. I've met him.
Oh.
He sounds exactly like that. Also, there's that group of cowboys. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but those guys have one. Let's see. There's that guy in the silver suit.
You mean the
Hey.
cowboys that like have the they like try to get bounties, and one of them has a nice suit, and he's also a ninja for some reason.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about.
Okay,
You know what I'm talking
I
about.
know those guys.
And then you got the guy in the silver armor with the little green thing.
Yeah.
That guy, he has.
That
I mean,
so
I'm pretty
that
sure
that,
that's
that
already
would
blown
be
up, so.
the first. Well, he probably had the fourth category or fifth, probably starting out,
Oh,
right?
that's true.
And then
That's
then he moved over to the second category, cockpit with engine and seat.
That's true.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting a sense of this. Okay, so yeah, rust buckets. Let me think of what else off the top of my head. Rust buckets. I mean, you also got the prostitute that flies with the insurrectionists.
I think we could just name things. We don't have to allude to them. As much fun as that is.
You know that one, and they've got like they've got those all those criminals. Except all the people we're talking about are mostly criminals, to be fair.
That's true.
But okay.
So maybe they're deserving of
All
rust
right.
buckets.
All right. So yes, there's the guy in the armor with the green baby. What other examples do you have of cockpits with engines and a seat?
Oh man, that's such a good question.
Actually, Luke Skywalker, right?
Mhm.
Because the X-wing, essentially, he travels around, goes to Dagobah, and it's about that simple. He's got his little robot in the back, R2-D2. He's got a little space for that, and that's it. You wonder, where do you go to the bathroom? You know, or
Right.
maybe you don't wonder that, and I'm just weird.
Oh, yeah, you probably hope that you don't have to go in your whatever 2-hour hyperspace drive that you have. What else is there though? I'm trying to think of like non-Star Wars examples, but I think like in Star Trek, right? Besides the actual ships, there are shuttles, right? So I would imagine the shuttles are similar to that, where you just have engines and seats.
Yeah,
and
that's the
space.
third category, room for stuff. Room for stuff. Nothing else is coming to mind in that category, to be honest. But I know what you mean. Yeah, like a Starfleet shuttle is iconic, and that's what it does. And then you got all right, carry stuff with guns. Now, there we get into a lot of different things. It might be fair to say that Han Solo and Chewie, actually, that's what their category has been at various points. I suppose they vacillate between rust bucket and carry stuff with guns at different times.
Yeah, I imagine so. I think that's whenever you get to carry stuff with guns, I really feel like that's a pretty big ballpark to throw in most stuff
Right.
like I think that's like Expanse, right? Expanse is carry stuff with guns. So
That's a good point. Yeah, the Rocinante is carry stuff with guns. Yeah, except actually they don't carry stuff much. At least
That's
I haven't
true.
got that far in the book yet, but in the show, I can't actually remember what they get paid to do very much when they were. Usually they're in the heart of the story and they don't have time to ever take on contracts and just do stuff. But I mean, it's a gunship, so there's that.
a stealth gunship.
Yeah. Okay, so and then you said the ship can be like an entire person. that one immediately what comes to mind is Farscape with Moya,
Right.
who's a character in the show. And
Yeah, I think anytime you get to that point where the ship has a main computer and the computer can communicate with them, it becomes a very interesting part of the crew dynamic, and you get these really interesting scenes where they have to do something because the ship told them to, which is fun. The quest giver is the vessel of which to achieve said quests.
Yeah. And then you have ships that you said are an entire setting, so you never even leave the ship.
Well, just think about an Alien. The entire movie takes place on the ship.
Yeah.
Right? You got what else is there? You got Warhammer's the
Space Hulk.
The Hulk.
Yeah, Space
Hulk. Yes. You got the Space Hulks where entire wars take place on a single ship. So
yeah.
You can have the ship be part of it, like the entire setting. You never have to leave it. I think Mothership is a great RPG where this, a ship could be the dungeon, right? So you go through the entire dungeon looking for survivors or whatever, and the dungeon is actually a spaceship, and that could be really interesting.
Fairly recently, I have to extol this. The very first science fiction role-playing game ever, the very first, Matt Ward made Metamorphosis Alpha, which by the way is awesome. Like, it's such a fun game. One of the, just for that, I think I already told you this, but for the audience, one of the characters was a panda that could fly and telepathically communicate, and one of the mutants could like explode people with their mind. And this is a game from 1975, so it's just it's so rad. And anyways, the premise of it is it's a gigantic mega dungeon that is a starship, and the entire a whole level is like, it might be like 50 miles across, and it's its own ecosystem, and it might be a forest, or like the next level up might be a entire city, and it might be this cyberpunk city where people, and you've got like 20, 30, 40, 50 levels like this, where it's this giant colony ship and it's gone haywire, and you start out as this tribal, and you don't know you're on a starship, and then you uncover these secrets over time. So that's cool. That's an entire setting. You would never leave the starship.
Right. And in addition to that, the ship can be the pinnacle, or the what I should rather say is the MacGuffin of the story, right? You can have like you said, a colony ship. Like, this is humanity's last effort or whatever. Like, basically, the ship from Halo, right, is the entirety of humanity is on this ship, so it's very important that its safety and whatever comes through. So, like, that's interesting too. The ship can be the vice of which the rest of the story is surrounded, even if it's not the setting.
The very namesake Battlestar Galactica. And it's the one remaining Battlestar that can survive and lead the remnants of humanity from the Cylons.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go back from there, kind of backward from the end to the front, because this is, I think, easier. And let's say we're going to do role-playing games, and we're going to have starships, or we're going to have the game Beyond Starships. Having it be the whole setting is probably easy if it's either thematic or if it's massive, like a Space Hulk or an asteroid that has an alien presence that you're trying to evade and escape, like in Mothership, or in the RPG, Alien RPG, if it's sci-fi horror. But so that seems pretty easy. That's your setting, but let's kind of like peel it back and go smaller, and you've got the ship as a person. That one also seems pretty easy to me, because you can form a narrative. You can have like a narrative-centric RPG or an event-based RPG or a story game, and it can center around a ship, and you can travel around places. And I don't know why, but what comes to mind actually is Runehammer's Warp Shell, which is very much like Farscape, where you don't know exactly how the warp shell works, and you're kind of learning it. And the warp shell, like, the kind of gimmick is it warps you into an adventure, and you're like it's like Quantum Leap, where you just end up in some place, and then you have to go on a shenanigan and help people and be a hero, and then you're back on your warp shell, and it randomly warps somewhere else, and you don't exactly know how it works or what's going on. And in that way, the ship takes on a kind of character of its own, and that seems also easy to do. I don't know. What do you think about that? Like stepping down from setting to the ship as a centerpiece, that doesn't seem that hard. Like, as far as
I think it makes sense a lot. I think the ship can be the heart of a campaign too. You can just say, well, we need to get this because the ship needs it. Oh, we need to get this, flux capacitor because the ship needs it, or we need to get this or that because the ship needs it and requires it, or become
it's endless quest hooks.
A step down from that is our ship is our loot, right? Like, oh, we got this so we can upgrade our ship, or oh, we finally upgraded to this shield capacity, so that's great. And it can be a loot reward. But you can also step down further away and abstract it further, where a ship is off screen, right? You can have it where it's entirely part of the game. You can just hand wave everything about it, like, oh yeah, your ship can do that. Oh yeah, your ship can go this atmosphere. That's not a problem. Your ship's this fast, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I want to return to space combat in a minute, but you could have Star Trek, and for the most part, Star Trek is like, all right, we're going to organize and confront the Hook on the bridge of the ship, and then we're going to leave the ship, or we're gonna change the setting or the scene away from the you could solve things from the bridge of the ship, but there is this, like, okay, now we're going to go away, an away team, so I say all that to say that it seems almost like the bigger the ship, the easier it is to form a role-playing game adventure around it. This is just an idea that's kind of forming as we go here, because we're going down the list. If we go even further, then I think you get into, it gets a little harder, and this looks like a sandbox game where it's more complicated. Carry stuff with guns, and one of the problems there is now you have to confront the fact that space is so big. Like, you gotta say, all right, well, you got a ship and you can go anywhere, and you got guns, so you can do something about it when you get there, and that seems challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it is if you want it to be, but it also doesn't have to be, because in sci-fi you also have hyperspace, warp space, jump space, whatever you want to call it, blink space, where you can hand wave distances if the setting so implies that that's possible, and doing so can be quite fun if you make it risky. I think the one good thing about our what was that system called, the 5e version of sci-fi, what was that game system we played called?
Dark Matter.
Yes, the one good thing about Dark Matter was the way that jump space was scary, because you basically either had to eat a very addictive roach or roll a die, and there was a good chance you would just blink into a black hole and be dead.
Yeah.
So that made it very tense, and it was a very tense decision of how many jumps do we have to do? Oh, we have to do 2 jumps? I don't know if we can do this mission. Maybe we should take a less risky mission. And that always added a lot of drama and tension to that.
Yeah.
But the distances didn't really matter there, right? It didn't really matter how far that jump was. It was the fact that we had to do the jump. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
and you can have variable sublight drives depending on the setting too. You can make that interesting, or you can hand wave it. You can have it to where I can move 6 spaces, you can only move 4 spaces, kind of stuff. Or you can just say, they're faster than you, and that's it. Narratively, they're faster than you, so it doesn't really matter what you do. There's no maneuvering, there's no positioning you can do. You're in space, so they're quicker than you, they get away. That's how that works. And
yeah, there's certainly a conversation that I've confronted there with our classic Traveler campaign, which I'll get back to, which is really comes down to narrative versus, or I've heard it said, story versus simulation. This idea that something has hard, no, this is 2 parsecs away, and it is 2 parsecs regardless. The story doesn't matter. And a story can emerge from that, and I feel like it has, versus you can improvise more when you don't have to try to literally measure. And actually, that's something I come up with constantly in a simulationist space game, or maybe a harder sci-fi game, is that I am wrangling with the variables of distance, rate, and time. And that simple math problem, distance, rate, and time, or force, mass, and acceleration, this interchange between where things are and how fast they can get there. If it's a simulation, that's a constant calculation, and if it's story driven, then it's like you said, it's like Star Wars. Like, I don't know how an X-wing can get to Dagobah on the other side of the galaxy. Maybe it's a special hyperspace route. It's faster. I don't know. The Force. I don't know. But anyways, getting to carrying stuff with guns gets us, I think, to a big question about Starships and role-playing games, which is space combat. Now, you and I have, I think, had a lot of that. I don't know. We definitely tried it in Starfinder. We tried it a little bit in Starfinder, and we took that model, and then I think the next stop along the way might have been Outlaw Void, which was Dark Matter 5e. And in Dark Matter 5e, it was a much simpler version of Starfinder in reality. Your starship has an armor class. It has mega hit points. It does mega damage. So basically, it's like a character, except it does times 100. And it has a series of weapons. And then the really innovative thing is it borrows from Star Trek, and it says every player now controls one aspect of the character, which is the ship. So you have you had a pilot and a captain and a gunner and systems operator, engineer, and everybody in Dark Matter. And I know I kind of crap talk 5e because it was a failed experiment. Trying to make 5e do science fiction was bad. But one thing that I actually thought was really, really good was the space combat, actually.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think it was funny because on the contrary, when we did 5e for naval combat, I felt like it was so lacking. Like, there was so much more desired there for naval combat, but once it was space naval combat, there was enough complexity there and things for the players to do in unison with each other. Like, the teamwork felt like it was there. Like, you felt like you're part of the crew because one player did one thing to give you a bonus on your roll, another player did another thing to make your engines roar, so you're able to do the maneuver that you wanted to do, and everybody was able to play off of each other and make a play as a crew, and that just felt so impactful at the table.
I'm glad you felt that way. I thought it was good. That kind of character sheet centric, I'm pressing buttons and turning dials, does not make sense to me when you're operating a mythical fantasy hero. But if it's a starship, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite tabletop board games, I've mentioned it multiple times, is X-Wing, where you have there's only so many elements of the ship that you have control over, and it's mostly just the dial. That's really all you have. The rest is static numbers. But in that game, each player had a role to play, and they had an impact on that role. You know, if one player made the wrong call with systems, now the engineer player doesn't have the energy that they need to do the thing that they want to do. Now the pilot doesn't have the speed they need to do the thing they want to do. You know, it all snowballed out of each player's individual decision. And then sometimes the gunner would just crit, so it didn't matter anyway. So
Yeah, and with that, I want to kind of skip ahead because this I think is, but before we do, like, let's kind of look out at other combat options. So we also tried Star Wars Western Games D6. I'm going to be honest with you. I did try to run space combat from the book, I think. We did have space combat. It was essentially you were trying to flee a planet. And I don't actually remember anything about it. And it may have been that I kind of hand-waved it. Every time I run Star Wars, we usually take a very strong narrative approach, which I think fits Star Wars. And so if you don't have this, like, I am a character on a grid as a starship, which happens in X-Wing, happened in Dark Matter, and you're measuring distances and you're determining if you can make a turn radius in order to pull off a maneuver, you can just frame something as options, which is probably demanding as a referee if you're doing things in a very improvisational and open-ended style and you don't have strict rules. But that's the other approach I've seen, is to say, I'm going to present some interesting choices. There's an asteroid field. You think you sense a signal off to the starboard side of the ship, and there are two fighters ahead. They seem like it seems like you're losing them. What do? You know, like, you present some options, and then, like, if they come up with clever solutions, if they work, you just do it. And that's kind of how I remember us doing Star Wars.
Yeah, and the one thing I liked about Western Games D6 is the TIE fighters felt so glass cannon-y. Like, it felt like, man, these things are going to take us out. But then if you actually fought back, it felt like you could win. And I think those are my favorite things.
That's nice.
Is watching the, you know, explosion go off and feeling, or watching, I guess it all happens in your imagination. But yeah, feeling the feeling of exhilaration when you finally take a TIE fighter out is pretty great. And it has the same impact as it does in the movies when they pop.
So maybe my memory is pretty good. And would you say that Star Wars West End Games D6 was fairly cinematic and at least in terms of the space combat?
Yeah, I think it's a successful space combat if you are going into it wanting a narrative, a cinematic experience. I think if you really want a tactical, you know, maybe even grid-based system, I don't know if it excels at that. I think the system as a whole, outside of space combat even, I think Western Games D6 fits better as a narrative play than, you know, like a tabletop type experience. I think it fits better in the mind's eye.
Okay, yeah, so let's kind of frame it as kind of two big broad options. Is cinematic story game type narrative driven style where you present options and complications and the players make choices and you roll dice to see how it works out. It's been a while, but I think that's similar to Star Wars Fantasy Flight games as well. Like, it has some crunchiness to it. I'm not trying to say that these games don't have any systems or anything, but that the point of them is to be cinematic and to be narrative driven. And then on the other side, you could have a tabletop skirmish game or war game like X-Wing. And as it stands, I would like to say, if I had to have, and this is me going down to the next category, cockpit with engines and a seat. You and I were talking about this in chat. If we had a role-playing game where you actually had starfighters, which I have to admit I have not often done. There have been a couple of instances where someone had a starfighter. Like literally a couple of instances in the years that I've done role-playing games. But I've never had, like, a wing of starfighters and they're all players. I've never done that, and I'm going to be honest with you. Off the top of my head, I have no idea how that would work. How would you narrate that? It would be so right? Because you would have to think about how movies work. Like if it's a movie,
Yeah.
they have to go from cockpit to cockpit. They have to show. It sounds immensely challenging.
I think if you zoom out, it works though. Like if you made it like X-wing squadrons, where it's each player has a specific role. One's the bomber, one's the fighter, one's the interceptor.
That's a good point.
Give them the roles to play in the squadron, make them fight as a
yeah,
squadron.
and then they could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, that is a good point. But if it's just like you are 5 X-wings and you all have X-wings and they all have the same loadout, and you're fighting 5 TIE fighters, describing a furball sounds like it sounds like an extreme challenge for a game master. But not if it's an actual tabletop where you're or even if it's done online. And as it stands right now, if I had to do a role-playing game tomorrow, which sounds cool, about a group of ace X-wing pilots that they have some drama and stuff in between missions, but then they go out on missions and combat air patrols, I would do something crunchy. I'd do X-wing and then role play in between X-wing, the miniatures game, because it has good rules for dogfighting.
Yeah. If you wanted to zoom out a little bit further beyond just squadrons and play more of a war game, there's also the indie tabletop war game. I guess it might be a skirmish game, but it's a miniatures game, miniatures agnostic game called Billion Suns by Mike Hutchinson. Same designer who created Gaslands, where you take place on multiple tables as you blink in and have to spend resources to blink in different vessels, and it becomes a bidding war of who's willing to spend more resources on the war to win. And you take place as you can think of your role as a player as more like that of an admiral who's looking at the screens, right, and trying to decide how to win from there. Very tactical in that way, but there are lots of tactical games and war games, skirmish games that have that tabletop aspect. I think what's really kind of needed is that blend between the two, that bread and butter of how do we make this feel like the same game if you have these two phases of play?
Right.
You have a story type of play and you have this very tactical combat system. How do you blend the two together? I think that's the trick.
Yeah, I hate to speak negatively of them, but I'll be honest. I'll plop some names down here. First of all, Classic Traveler. I love the space combat. It feels exactly like The Expanse to me. So you don't have. There are starfighters. There's these things called ship's boats, and they're essentially little fighters. But really, combat between ships occurs between vessels that are trying to seek each other out, like in submarine warfare, and you don't know where they are. And once you find them, you can just kill them, and it's horrifying. And you never know when your life's going to get snuffed out, and it's very tense. But at the same time, 6 minutes and a half will pass per round, and you're just waiting to hear back, and so this kind of submarine warfare and it's probably more realistic, actually, like The Expanse.
Yeah, and it's terrifying too, because I think all movies that are made about submarine warfare, you feel that tense drama of them looking at those radars and just hoping that those signals don't come up, and
so
those alarms start blaring.
I love that, and I've really enjoyed the drama of them encountering a ship, and they're like, oh no, is this a good guy? Is this a bad guy? Is it a pirate? What do we do? Do we reveal ourselves? It feels like The Expanse, where you're this tense, what do we do next? And every time it's just really, I love Classic Traveler. I'm enjoying that. We use the space combat straight out of the book from the, we don't add High Guard or any of the later books. But then here's some other ones we've tried. So the Starfinder method I actually thought was pretty good. I don't know how you feel. I think that's probably my favorite, to be honest. And when I say Starfinder, I mean basically Dark Matter 5e, what we did. Starfinder's too complicated to me, but Dark Matter 5e was really good. You had this suite of options, and you could interplay with other, stations and come up with ideas. And then I tried Stars Without Number. Stars Without Number Space Combat had a narrative point system. It had something called, I think they were called command points, and you would try to generate command points by doing things, and then you could spend the command points to accomplish something, but it was a narrative thing. So it was meant to, I will do it. It was very story gamey in a game that was not a story game. It would be like, I'm going to try to inspire the crew, which will give us 2 command points, and then you'll pass it on to the next person. They'll say, I'm going to check the engines, and that'll give us a command point. And then you'll build a pool of command points and be like, all right, we have 6 command points. Turn us about and fire. And I think that sounds good when I describe it, but it wasn't good. Because, like, am I trying to win the game? Am I trying to tell a story? Like, honestly, most of the players, like, kind of fell on one side or the other, so it didn't do either well. I hate to crap talk Stars with that number because it was a great game, but the space combat, it didn't work well for us. Like, no one really quite got it. And then we tried some Powered by the Apocalypse type stuff, and it was also similar to that in that way, where it just didn't quite express the experience of, like, being in space combat in a starship. So
Right. It's something that's not easy to get either, because
right, yeah,
with my experiences in tabletop games, you even have like it comes to mind the deck building game called Star Realms, where your whole job is to generate a fleet of ships to out combat the other one. It doesn't feel like that. Like it doesn't. The vibes that you get in that game is those of a deck building game, and not those of ship combat. And it really depends on what you want it to be, though, because if you want it to be like Star Trek, where ship combat is basically just one of 2 things: it's either we're going to talk this out, or we're going to shoot our photon torpedoes.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Those are the 2 options, and that's the one thing I didn't like about Star Trek. So, for instance, my experience with Star Trek is actually through Star Trek Next Generation. That's the only content of Star Trek that I've actually consumed. But in there, it felt like Picard. Whenever he launched the proton torpedoes, it was almost always a guarantee that they were going to succeed at that point. Like it was usually a bad or desperate call, but then they won anyway. And there was not a lot of tense moments when it's like, oh no, are they going to get out alive or not?
Right.
Not really, because most of the time they talk their way out of the situation, and then if they didn't, then they just blow them up anyway. So you can hand wave ship combat if you want to at your table.
Yeah. So I guess to maybe go down a level from there's simulation and there's narrative. Maybe there's also like there's just pure narrative, where you present situations and you kind of see how it shakes out and you allow for choices. We talked to Jim Parkin on here, so I would call that like an FKR style, where you're just focused on the interactions between referee and player, and that provides a lot of drama. You use the dice if you need them, and oftentimes you don't. And then you could have narrative with mechanics, or with a lot of mechanics. And I guess what I'm coming to is, in my experience, that hasn't worked well for space combat. It's just been my experience. On the other side, where you have simulation, you've got a hardcore simulation, where it's either got grids or measuring distances, or it's actually physics-based, and you're actually doing formula, which Classic Traveler has the formula in the book, for things, and you can read between tables and stuff. And I gotta say, in my opinion, works great for space combat. I think it works really good, and the story will just rise up out of that, and it'll feel like you're in a show or in a movie where you're trying to figure out how to operate the ship, and it might just blow up around you, and it's tense. Like as you're doing all that simulation, there's less ludonarrative dissonance because, well, it's a starship, and so you have to operate it and you have to figure it out. So anyways, of those 4 styles, the one that seems to not work is trying to do both. Like that's been my experience, because we did White Star. I've done this recently where I would say on the purely narrative side, where you present choices, and you don't try to measure distances and stuff, the index card RPG method of having a deck of cards would be amazing. And I bet there is one out there. In fact, probably Index Card RPG has them. A deck of cards of space combat complications. And you could shuffle it and drop them down and create like a narrative pathway and build an architecture of encounters. And it would be just like Star Trek. It'd be like 2 cruisers appear. What do you do? I dive for one of the cruisers and force the other cruiser into a crossfire. Okay, now there's a group of asteroids. What do you do? I come about and I try to lure the cruisers into the asteroids. Or I dive for the asteroid to occlude myself on its surface. Okay, you dive toward the asteroid, but there's a giant hole here, but the rest of it is open space, and so you'll have a penalty and you'll have to make a roll against the cruisers. I dive into the hole. Okay, there's creatures in the hole. You see what I mean? It sounds like I'm almost dealing random cards for interesting situations.
Yeah.
So that would work great, and actually has. When I've done White Star, I love that approach to space combat.
I mean, I like the approach to gaming in general. It's just
that's true. It works.
You have an oracle, and you play off of narrative and decisions, and that's the way to go. But finding a balance is what's tricky, because not only does the combat and the narrative have to align, you also have to align with characters and story, but characters and their own abilities, because maybe the abilities of the pilot are actually hand-to-hand combat. And how does hand-to-hand combat translate to pilot seat? Well, maybe it doesn't, or maybe it does. I don't know. And you can have an interesting character in an uninteresting place if the pilot's only option is to move.
I guess
less moving is interesting. So I mean, that's the thing, is it really depends on what the system provides and what you want it to provide.
Right. This is a good point about characters, and I guess this is my spicy take I'm starting to form here, is while I usually don't like black or white thinking in tabletop, this actually seems like maybe it ought to be one or the other. This is an oil and water thing. And what I mean is, again,
you have to use high turbulence to mix them.
So you got narrative and simulation, right? Like we're talking about here, and you're saying, well, it matters how the characters can interact with this. This ought to be a part of it. Is like, does this person actually have pilot skill? Do they have what level of pilot skill? Can they add a dice pool of 4 dice, to their pilot check? In Star Wars West End Games D6, what happens if they can only add 1? And my observation in this, that what we're talking about, is that really there's 2 different approaches. One is simulation, which is that if you don't have a pilot skill, well, you're smoked. Too bad. And that creates something really dramatic and interesting. It creates the story. The story emerges from the simulation. And that's like The Expanse. It's like Holden trying to fly the Rocinante because what's his name is gone. He's not going to do as good of a job. And then that's going to create drama, and that will naturally kind of unfold. Or if the pilot goes down, suddenly it's really tense. The opposite of simulation narrative, what I would suggest is like, in Star Wars, everyone's a pilot for some reason. It's like one of the most complex things you could do, and for some reason, everybody could do it. Oh, I could fly it, so it's never a question of can you do the thing that's cool, if it's narrative driven like that, like Star Wars and cinematic. Everybody can do the cool stuff. Everybody can operate a speeder. Everybody can fire a blaster. Everybody can operate a starship. Everybody in the whole world is like heroic and talented, but then some are super awesome. And that's and so when somebody shows up and they're like, Wedge Antilles, that's like, whoa. Or who's the new Resistance guy? Poe Dameron, right? Like Poe Dameron shows up and they're like, oh my gosh, can you believe he could do that? But
he's just a fancy flyboy.
Yeah. But we've seen his kind before. But anyways, Yeah, I guess I'm coming to the conclusion that in Starships, it's best to either actually kind of treat them seriously like Starships, or just have fun. But trying to do both can actually, I think, be kind of hard, or at least hasn't worked out for me. And it also looks to me like the smaller you go, and the less interesting options you have. Like if you're just in a combat air patrol of 5 X-Wings versus 5 TIE fighters and everyone has the exact same loadout, that will be harder to narrate theater of the mind. Now, you can present some like, oh, you have a TIE fighter on your left and a TIE fighter that's at your rear, it's gaining, it's locking on you, but the one to your left front is locking on your friend, and then you could do the Powered by the Apocalypse thing and roll that forward. But honestly, that's not going to be as interesting to do in a tabletop format. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But
yeah, I think it just depends on, you know, what the tone of the game you're trying to go for is too, because I think a lot of times we have a similar, regardless of what system or setting or otherwise that we play in, I think we have a similar idea of tone and genre that we're going for with sci-fi, and sometimes like pulpier games versus horror games, they all have these different ideas of how to handle these situations. So
that's true too.
I think like finding a merge between the system and setting and tone, like that's really where you're going to get your idea of what matters and what doesn't matter. Like in a heavy horror game, there probably isn't
sci-fi
shields.
horror.
In a sci-fi horror game, you're not going to have shields, right? Because shields would just be uninteresting in a game where everything's supposed to be really tense and scary, right? So you don't need to worry about that. But we're in a pulpy game, you know, shields can make impact but not actually, you know, change the effect of that outcome. So I don't know, it's one of those things where you kind of gotta balance it with what it is too, and hopefully whatever setting or system you're using reinforces the setting.
Yeah.
And hopefully whatever that is. And if it's not, then cut it. And if it is, then, you know, maybe lean into that. Lean into the parts that work.
Yeah. Alien, Star Wars, Star Trek, and The Expanse are not the same thing in terms of their tone and feel. And the Starships reflect that. And the space combat experience and traveling in them and living in them all feel different. All have different things going on. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep. I mean, is there anything else we need to mention as far as? I mean, clearly we've looked through the entire catalog here, and we can't afford any of these ships.
All right, if you had to pick one, what would it be?
I don't know. I think I'd pick Rust Bucket.
Yeah, me too.
It seems so fun to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it comes back to that.
We do need to name this one though. The Rust Bucket we have, we need to name it because it's bad luck to be flying around without a name for it.
Oh man, I'm so bad at that.
Well, we can think about it.
Yeah.
We don't have to name it right now.
Think about.
But yeah.
Ship name.
Maybe we should ask the audience what we name our ship too.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe, you know, if somebody can get the signal to the Spacecast, this transmission back, you could leave a review, and you could leave what you think the spaceship's name should be. Yeah, and then we'll name it that. That'd be helpful. Yeah, I'm terrible at naming starships. You still there?
Yeah, sorry, I'm sick.
I thought the internet crapped out.
I mean, it is really laggy over here, but we're good. We're still here.
It's good on my end. Anyways, thanks a lot for chatting with me about starships, Jake.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Hopefully by next time my stomach is over the peaches.
Yep. See you around.
Bye.
Mythic Mountains RPG is a private online play club that focuses on folk RPGs. Folk RPGs are the games that belong to all of us. They're what actually happens at a table between friends. It's their voice that has the authority on what is fun and what works for them. Weekly, we upload our games to allow others to sit in with us. The channel isn't monetized. We don't own the artwork, music, software, or games shown in these actual plays, and you can find links to their authors in the description. Like, subscribe, and share if you wish, or don't. Just like games in person, you're welcome to pull up a chair, sit in, and watch some of our games. No performances, no fancy equipment, just regular people playing full pencil and paper role-playing games and having a good time. We hope these games will prove a source of enjoyment to anyone just wanting to listen in, anyone looking for examples of how actual groups run and play folk RPGs, and most importantly, if you haven't found your group yet, you're welcome here at ours.